Welcome to Hardly, where books turn into 3 stories, refreshing your knowledge in minutes. Today, we study together Rose Cartwright's book, The Maps We Carry, navigating the landscape of trauma and healing in which we probe into. Challenging the mental illness paradigm through altered states of consciousness and personal storytelling to uncover the true nature of distress. Rose Cartwright is a screenwriter whose memoir, Pure, about her life with intrusive sexual thoughts, was adapted for Channel 4. Don't go away. Hardly, the editor, will be right back with the story. Today, we explore 3 stories from the book that illustrate the power of altered states of consciousness in reshaping our understanding of mental distress. First, we dive into an intense personal experience with psychedelics that brings unexpected revelations. Next, we explore a heartfelt confrontation with the mental health system's limitations. Finally, we witness a transformative journey into self-acceptance and a new narrative around trauma and healing. Story 1. The Shattering Illumination. I was on a silent meditation retreat in California, feeling out of place among the solemn participants. On the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. Without warning, my consciousness shifted. It was as if my mind had detached from my body, floating into a realm of pure sensory experience. I was overwhelmed by a sudden surge of emotions that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within. There was fear, yes, but also an unexplainable joy, a sense of liberation I had never felt before. For the next 90 minutes, I experienced what could only be described as a profound altered state of consciousness. My identity dissolved, and I felt connected to something much larger than myself. There were no thoughts, no words, just a vivid, kaleidoscopic swirl of light and feeling. The book quotes, "For the 90 minutes just gone, I didn't have a single thought, intrusive or otherwise." It was a break from the incessant mental chatter that had plagued me for so long. A rare moment of peace in my troubled mind. When I emerged from this state, I was hit by a wave of confusion and curiosity. How could something so extraordinary happen in the absence of any psychedelic substances? This experience made me question everything I thought I knew about my own mind and the nature of mental distress. It wasn't a cure, but it was a glimpse into a different reality. One that hinted at the possibility of healing beyond the conventional narratives. I realized that there might be other ways to understand my distress. Ways that didn't involve pathology or diagnosis. This revelation set the stage for my next encounter, one that would challenge my beliefs even further. Story 2. The Fractured System. A few months later, I found myself in Dublin at the Institute of Neuroscience, interviewing a leading scientist about mental health diagnoses. The interview was supposed to be a routine exploration of recent findings, but it quickly took an unexpected turn. Dr. Gillen, the scientist, began explaining her research into the biological basis, or rather the lack thereof, of psychiatric diagnoses. She stated bluntly, "OCD is not a biological reality," a statement that struck me like a bolt of lightning. I felt my chest tighten with resistance. How could this be true? My whole life, I had been told that my mental distress was a result of a biological imbalance, a disease in my brain. Yet here was a reputable scientist telling me that there was no distinct biological marker for OCD or any other mental health condition. I had always believed that my brain was different from others, that this difference was the source of my suffering. But Dr. Gillen's research showed something else entirely. that these differences in brain activity were not unique to OCD and could not be used to define it. As she spoke, I could feel a storm brewing inside me, a mix of anger, confusion, and denial. My mind raced with questions. If there were no biological markers for these conditions, what did that mean for all the people like me who had been diagnosed and treated based on this model? My whole identity, my advocacy work, everything was built on the premise that mental illnesses were illnesses like any other, grounded in biology. This conversation was a pivotal moment for me. It forced me to confront the possibility that the mental health system I had trusted for so long was fundamentally flawed. If the foundation of psychiatric diagnosis was so shaky, what did that mean for the treatments based on these diagnoses? It was a harrowing realization that would lead me to question not just the system, but my role within it. This experience, however unsettling, pushed me to delve deeper into my own understanding of trauma and healing, setting the stage for a profound personal transformation. Story 3: Rewriting the Self. The final story in this exploration took place during a conversation with a close friend who had been following my journey. She had noticed my growing frustration with the limitations of the mental health model and suggested I try a different approach, a more personal, introspective one. She introduced me to the concept of narrative therapy, where the stories we tell ourselves about our experiences can profoundly shape our reality. Intrigued, I began to experiment with this idea, exploring my past through a different lens. Instead of seeing my experiences as symptoms of an illness, I started to view them as responses to the challenges I had faced. This shift in perspective was transformative. I began to see that my intrusive thoughts and compulsions were not just random symptoms of a malfunctioning brain, but were, in fact, coping mechanisms developed in response to trauma and stress. The book captures this shift with clarity. It was only when I stopped framing my distress as the symptom of disease that I reached a deeper appreciation of its seriousness. This new narrative allowed me to move away from the medical model and embrace a more holistic view of my mental health. I realized that my experiences were not failures or signs of weakness, but rather expressions of my resilience and survival. This shift in perspective didn't happen overnight. It required a lot of introspection, conversations with trusted friends and therapists, and most importantly, a willingness to embrace uncertainty. But as I began to rewrite my story, I found a new sense of peace and acceptance. I no longer saw myself as broken or in need of fixing. Instead, I saw myself as a complex, multifaceted human being, navigating the challenges of life in the best way I knew how. These 3 stories illustrate a profound shift in understanding. The move from viewing mental distress as a pathological illness to seeing it as a meaningful response to life's challenges. It's a shift that has the potential to transform not just individual lives, but the entire way we think about mental health. Conclusion. As the editor of Hardly, through learning these stories, we can envision a future where mental health is understood not as a series of diagnoses, but as a deeply personal journey of healing and growth. This approach allows for a more compassionate and nuanced understanding of the human experience, where each person's story is valued and honored in its own right. In reflecting on the key argument, challenging the mental illness paradigm through altered states of consciousness and personal storytelling to uncover the true nature of distress, we've explored several compelling stories that showcase a transformative approach to mental health. the book offers an alternative narrative, suggesting that what we often perceive as symptoms of illness may instead be expressions of deeper, unresolved trauma and emotional responses. One story that stands out is the author's encounter with a community support group in a small town. Here, individuals from various backgrounds shared their personal stories of mental distress. In this setting, there was no talk of diagnoses or medical treatments. Instead, there was a collective acknowledgement of pain and a shared desire for understanding and connection. The author noted, "In that circle, there were no patients, just people. For the first time, I saw my distress mirrored in others' eyes, not as a disease, but as a common human experience." This experience profoundly impacted the author, highlighting the importance of community and narrative in healing. By focusing on personal stories and altered states of consciousness, the book urges us to move away from rigid medical models and towards a more holistic, compassionate approach to mental health. It challenges us to rethink our narratives and consider that healing might lie not in categorizing our experiences as illnesses, but in embracing the complexities of the human condition. As the editor of Hardly, by understanding these insights, we can inspire a future where mental health is approached with empathy, flexibility, and an openness to the transformative power of our personal stories.